For 3 years, my landlord harassed me, invaded my privacy, and threatened me in my own home. I felt trapped, powerless, until the day I caught him on camera breaking in. That moment changed everything and ended his career. When I first moved into the small duplex on Maple Street 3 years ago, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. The rent was reasonable for the area, and my landlord, Robert Martinez, seemed friendly enough during our initial meeting. He had this charming smile and spoke about maintaining properties with pride. I was 28, fresh out of a bad breakup, and desperately needed a fresh start. The duplex wasn't luxurious, but it had character with its old hardwood floors and vintage fixtures. Little did I know that Robert Martinez would become the biggest nightmare of my adult life. The red flags started appearing within the first month. I come home from my job at the local marketing firm to find Robert letting himself into the building's common areas without notice. At first, I brushed it off thinking maybe he was doing maintenance work. But then items started disappearing. My portable dryer that I kept in the shared basement laundry room vanished one Tuesday. When I asked Robert about it, he shrugged and claimed he'd never seen it. The following week, my storage bins containing winter clothes disappeared from the same area. "Listen, Sarah," Robert told me with that same charming smile, though now it felt more like a sneer, "I can't be responsible for tenants leaving their belongings in common areas. You should have read your lease more carefully." I did read my lease carefully. Nowhere did it state that my belongings would be confiscated from designated storage areas. But I was young and intimidated, so I let it slide. That was my first mistake. The plumbing issues started in month 6. The old cast iron pipes in my unit began backing up regularly, causing disgusting water to flood my bathroom floor. I called Robert immediately each time it happened, documenting everything with photos and timestamps. His response was always the same: he'd send his guy over to snake the drain, charge me a service fee, and the problem would return within weeks. The final straw with the plumbing came during a particularly bad backup that flooded not just my bathroom, but my bedroom carpet as well. I had to throw away clothes, shoes, and furniture that got soaked in the mess. When Robert's plumber finally arrived, he took one look at the situation and shook his head. "Ma'am, these pipes are original to the building. This isn't your fault, it's normal wear and tear on a 70-year-old system," he told me quietly while Robert was outside taking a phone call. Despite this professional assessment, Robert handed me a bill for $400 the next day. "Tenant caused the backup by flushing inappropriate items," the invoice read. "Payment due immediately." I was furious. I'd lived alone, I was careful about what went down my drains, and even his own plumber said it wasn't my fault. But Robert was unmoved. He threatened eviction proceedings if I didn't pay within 48 hours. At the time, I was already stretched thin financially and couldn't afford a legal battle or the cost of moving, so I paid the $400. For the first time in 3 years, my rent was late the following month because that unexpected expense had depleted my emergency fund. Robert's retaliation was swift and merciless. "Sarah, I notice your rent was late. This is unacceptable behavior," he said when he cornered me in the hallway. His voice had lost any pretense of friendliness. "I'm implementing a new parking policy. You'll need to pay an additional $150 per month for your parking space." This was absurd. I'd been parking in the same designated spot for over 2 years without issue. The lease I'd signed included parking at no additional cost. When I pointed this out, Robert's face turned red. "The lease allows for reasonable modifications. Take it or leave it, but if you don't like my management style, you're free to move." That night, I called my cousin Emma, who worked as a paralegal. She recommended I speak with her boss, attorney Michael Chen, who specialized in tenant rights. Michael reviewed my lease and all the documentation I'd kept, including photos of the plumbing issues, receipts for the charges, and copies of all our email exchanges. "Sarah, you have a strong case here. This landlord is clearly violating several tenant protection laws," Michael told me during our consultation. "I can send him a letter outlining your rights and demanding he cease these illegal practices." I agreed, and Michael sent a firmly worded letter to Robert explaining that his parking fee was illegal under our existing lease agreement and that charging tenants for normal wear and tear violations violated state landlord-tenant law. The letter worked, temporarily. Robert backed down on the parking fee, but I could see the rage burning in his eyes every time we crossed paths. His next move was more sinister. I started noticing signs that someone had been in my apartment while I was at work. Items moved slightly, closet doors I always kept closed standing ajar, and once, my laptop was warm when I came home, though I distinctly remembered shutting it down that morning. I installed a small security camera by my front door and caught Robert letting himself in with a master key while I was at work. The footage was clear: Robert entering my apartment, staying for about 10 minutes, then leaving. When I confronted him via email with screenshots from the video, he claimed he was conducting a routine inspection and that he had the right to enter with 24-hour notice. Except he'd never given me any notice, and the timestamp showed he'd been there for much longer than any reasonable inspection would require. "You're being paranoid, Sarah," he wrote back. "Maybe you should consider if this living situation is right for you." The harassment escalated from there. Robert would show up at odd hours, claiming he needed to check something urgent. He'd bang on my door early in the morning or late at night, always with some excuse about maintenance or inspections. When I stopped answering, he'd use his key to enter anyway, calling out that he was just checking to make sure everything was okay. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. I started staying late at work just to avoid being there when Robert might decide to drop by. I couldn't relax, couldn't have friends over, couldn't feel safe in the place I paid to call home. The stress was affecting my work performance and my health. I was losing weight, having trouble sleeping, and jumping at every unexpected noise. Living conditions in the apartment were deteriorating rapidly, and I was beginning to understand that this wasn't accidental neglect. The front porch had been sagging dangerously for over a year. I'd mentioned it multiple times to Robert, especially after my mail carrier commented that he was afraid to step on it. Robert always promised to look into it but never did anything substantial. Instead, he'd have his handyman prop up the sagging sections with temporary supports that looked more dangerous than the original problem. The interior wasn't much better. Paint constantly peeled from the ceiling, leaving chips and flakes all over my furniture and floor. When I complained, Robert would send someone to slap a quick coat of paint over the problem areas, but it always started peeling again within weeks. I later learned this was because they were painting over old lead paint without proper preparation, which was not only ineffective but potentially dangerous. The heating system was another nightmare entirely. The old gas heater in my unit made concerning noises all winter long. It would bang, hiss, and sometimes emit strange smells that made me worry about gas leaks. I asked Robert multiple times to have it professionally inspected, but he always claimed it was just old but perfectly safe. During one particularly cold snap in January, the heater stopped working entirely, and I had to use space heaters for a week before Robert's handyman could fix it. The repair consisted mainly of duct tape and what appeared to be a prayer. But the breaking point came when Robert announced his next scheme. After 3 years of steadily increasing harassment and declining living conditions, he knocked on my door with a new lease renewal offer. I opened the document expecting the usual modest rent increase, but nearly choked when I saw the numbers. "You're raising my rent by $500 a month?" I asked, staring at the paper in disbelief. "Market rate adjustments," Robert said with a shrug. "You can take it or leave it. There's plenty of demand for this unit." $500 represented nearly a 40% increase over my current rent. For a deteriorating apartment with illegal plumbing, dangerous heating, and a landlord who treated me like a criminal. There was no way I could afford it, and Robert knew it. This was his way of forcing me out while making it look like my choice to leave. That night, I called every rental listing in the area. The housing market was brutal, but I managed to find a small apartment across town that I could afford. It wasn't as spacious as my current place, but it had reliable plumbing, a safe front entrance, and most importantly, a landlord who seemed sane. I put down a deposit immediately and gave Robert my 30-day notice. His reaction was predictably vindictive. "Fine, but don't expect to get your security deposit back. This place will need significant repairs after your tenancy." I'd been meticulous about maintaining the apartment, taking photos regularly and keeping detailed records of any issues. I knew he had no legal basis to keep my deposit, but I also knew Robert didn't care about legal requirements. As my move-out date approached, I started researching my options for dealing with Robert's pattern of harassment and illegal practices. That's when I discovered something that changed everything. The city had an online portal where residents could file complaints about code violations and request building inspections. I'd never thought to go this route before, but now I had nothing to lose. I spent an entire evening documenting every single violation I could remember from my 3 years in the apartment. The list was longer than I'd realized: the unpermitted porch repairs, the illegal plumbing configuration, the dangerous heating system, the lead paint issues, multiple violations of tenant privacy rights, and failure to maintain the property in habitable condition. 4 days before my scheduled move-out date, I called the city building inspection department. The woman who answered was incredibly helpful and seemed genuinely concerned when I described the conditions in my apartment. "Ma'am, some of what you're describing sounds quite serious. We can have an inspector out there as early as tomorrow if you're available to meet them," she told me. I took a personal day from work to meet with Inspector Williams, a thorough professional who arrived with a clipboard, camera, and what appeared to be several different measuring devices. I gave him a complete tour of the apartment and the common areas, pointing out every issue I'd documented over the years. Inspector Williams was particularly concerned about the porch situation. "This structure is definitely not up to current safety codes. Do you happen to know if permits were pulled for this work?" I told him about Robert's recent repair job, which consisted mainly of nailing a few additional boards onto the existing structure without addressing the underlying foundation issues. I'm going to need to see permit records for any work done on this porch, he said, making notes. And we'll need to have a structural engineer evaluate this before anyone else uses it. He spent over 2 hours going through the building, taking measurements, photographs, and samples of the peeling paint. By the time he finished, his clipboard was covered with notes and violation codes. Miss Johnson, I want to be clear that what I found here represents multiple serious violations of city building codes. The property owner will be receiving citations for each violation, and they'll need to correct these issues within specified timeframes or face daily fines, Inspector Williams explained. Each violation carries a penalty of $500 per day until it's properly corrected. I felt a mixture of vindication and nervous excitement. After 3 years of being treated like I was the problem, finally someone with authority was validating my concerns. What happens next? I asked. I'll be filing my report today, and Mr. Martinez will receive official notice of the violations within 48 hours. He'll have a chance to contest the findings, but based on what I've documented today, these are pretty clear-cut violations. That evening, I felt lighter than I had in months. For the first time, I was hopeful that Robert might finally face consequences for his behavior. I had no idea how much drama was still to come. A week before my official move-out date, Robert showed up at my door unannounced, as usual. But this time, his demeanor was different. Instead of his typical condescending attitude, he seemed agitated and slightly frantic. "Sarah, we need to talk about your move-out procedures," he said, pushing past me into my living room without invitation. "Okay, what about them?" I asked, following him but keeping my distance. "I need you out by 8 a.m. on the 15th. No exceptions. I have contractors coming to start work on the unit, and I can't have you interfering with their schedule." This was news to me. Our lease specified that I had until midnight on the 15th to vacate, which was standard for month-to-month tenancies in our state. I'd already planned to have the moving truck arrive around noon, giving me the morning to finish packing and do a final cleaning. "Robert, my lease gives me until midnight on the 15th. I'll be out by then, but I'm not changing my moving schedule to accommodate your contractors." His face started turning that familiar shade of red. "Listen here, Sarah. I'm telling you how this is going to work. If you're not out by 8 a.m., I'm calling the police to have you removed for trespassing." I stood my ground. "You can call whoever you want, but I know my rights. I'll be out by midnight as specified in the lease." Robert stormed out without another word, slamming my door hard enough to rattle the windows. I immediately called Michael Chen, my attorney, to confirm that I was correct about the move-out timeline. "You're absolutely right, Sarah. Don't let him intimidate you. If he does call the police, they'll tell him the same thing I'm telling you now. You have every right to remain in the unit until midnight on your final day." Despite Michael's reassurance, I was worried about what Robert might do. His behavior had become increasingly erratic, and I didn't put it past him to try something foolish. I decided to be proactive and went to the local police station the morning of my move-out day. Officer Martinez, no relation to my landlord, thankfully, listened patiently as I explained the situation. "Ma'am, it sounds like you're handling this correctly. If your landlord does call us, we'll explain the law to him. But you might want to keep your attorney's number handy, just in case." I spent the morning doing final packing and cleaning. My moving truck was scheduled to arrive at 2 p.m., and I planned to be completely out by 6 p.m., well ahead of the midnight deadline. Around 11 a.m., I needed to make a trip to my storage unit to drop off some boxes that wouldn't fit in the moving truck. When I returned to the apartment an hour later, something was wrong immediately. My front door, which I'd left unlocked since I was just running a quick errand, now had several long nails sticking out of the frame. Someone had literally nailed my door shut while I was gone. I stood there staring at the nails for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. Then the anger hit me like a physical force. Robert had actually broken into my apartment and barricaded me out on my moving day. This wasn't just harassment anymore, this was criminal behavior. I called 911 immediately. "I need to report a breaking and entering. My landlord has illegally entered my apartment and sealed me out while I was gone." The dispatcher took my information and told me officers were on their way. While I waited, I called Michael Chen and explained what had happened. "Sarah, this is serious. What your landlord has done constitutes criminal trespass, vandalism, and possibly illegal eviction. Don't let the responding officers treat this as a simple landlord-tenant dispute. This is criminal behavior." Officers Johnson and Roberts arrived within 15 minutes. I showed them the nailed door and explained the timeline of events. Officer Johnson examined the nails and the damage to my door frame. "Ma'am, you're right that this appears to be illegal entry and vandalism. Do you have any evidence that your landlord is responsible?" I showed them the text messages Robert had sent that morning, reiterating his demand that I be out by 8 a.m. and threatening to call police. I also showed them my lease, which clearly stated my right to remain until midnight. "We need to speak with your landlord about this," Officer Roberts said. "Do you have his contact information?" I gave them Robert's phone number and address. Officer Johnson called him while Officer Roberts continued documenting the scene and taking photographs of the damaged door. "Sir, this is Officer Johnson with the city police. We need you to come to the Maple Street property immediately to discuss some vandalism that's occurred." "Yes, sir, right now would be good." While we waited for Robert to arrive, I explained the full history of harassment and the recent building code violations to the officers. They listened with growing concern, especially when I described the pattern of illegal entries and the escalating threats. Robert arrived about 20 minutes later, and I could see the panic in his eyes when he spotted the police cars in front of the building. He'd brought his handyman, Danny, with him, which immediately made me suspicious. "Officers, I'm not sure what this is about," Robert said, putting on his most innocent voice. "I've been having ongoing issues with this tenant, and I was just trying to secure the property." "Sir, did you enter this apartment without the tenant's permission and nail the door shut?" Officer Johnson asked directly. "Well, I may have secured the door, but this tenant has been causing problems and threatening me. I was just protecting my property." Officer Roberts stepped forward. "Sir, regardless of any disputes you may have with your tenant, you cannot legally enter her apartment without proper notice and permission. And you definitely cannot barricade her out of a unit she's legally entitled to occupy." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Robert becoming increasingly agitated and contradictory in his explanations. Finally, Officer Johnson stepped aside and called for a supervisor. "Ma'am, we're going to need to file a report about this incident, and our supervisor is going to want to speak with both of you," Officer Johnson told me. "What your landlord did today appears to meet the criteria for several criminal charges." I watched Robert's face drain of color when he heard the word charges. For 3 years, this man had made my life miserable with apparent impunity. Now, finally, he was facing real consequences. Unfortunately, Robert wasn't completely stupid. When he saw the supervisor's car approaching, he quickly made some excuse about needing to move his vehicle and left the scene entirely. By the time Sergeant Williams arrived, Robert was gone. "This is unfortunate, but not uncommon," Sergeant Williams explained. "Landlords who engage in this type of behavior often know they're crossing legal lines, and they try to avoid accountability when law enforcement gets involved." The officers helped me remove the nails from my door frame so I could access my apartment. The damage was significant. I'd need to replace the entire frame, and several of the nails had splintered the wood around my lock mechanism. "Ma'am, we're going to file charges for breaking and entering, criminal trespass, and vandalism. These are serious charges, and given the pattern of behavior you've described, the prosecutor will likely take this case seriously," Sergeant Williams told me. I spent the rest of the day completing my move with the help of the moving crew, but my mind was reeling from everything that had happened. After 3 years of feeling powerless against Robert's harassment, suddenly everything was changing rapidly. The next week brought a flood of developments. I received a copy of the police report, which detailed all the charges being filed against Robert Martinez. The breaking and entering charge was classified as a felony because he'd entered an occupied dwelling without permission. The other charges were misdemeanors, but together they painted a clear picture of criminal behavior. Inspector Williams called to update me on the code violation case. "Miss Johnson, I wanted to let you know that Mr. Martinez has been cited for 12 separate building code violations. The fines are accumulating at $500 per day for each violation until they're corrected. As of today, he owes the city over $18,000 in penalties." I also heard from Michael Chen, who had been following up on my security deposit. "Sarah, given everything that's happened, I think we have grounds for not just recovering your deposit, but seeking additional damages for harassment and illegal eviction. I'd like to discuss filing a civil lawsuit." But the most satisfying update came from an unexpected source. My former upstairs neighbor, Janet, called me the day after I moved out. "Sarah, I wanted to thank you for whatever you did to finally get Robert in trouble. The building inspector came back yesterday with a city official and condemned the front porch. They've put up barriers and everything. Robert was here screaming at them, but they told him the whole building might get condemned if he doesn't fix everything immediately." Janet went on to explain that Robert had been scrambling to hire legitimate contractors to address the violations, but he was discovering that proper repairs would cost tens of thousands of dollars. The porch alone would need to be completely rebuilt with proper permits and inspections. The plumbing system required extensive work to bring it up to code. The heating systems in both units needed replacement. He's been calling tenants trying to get them to agree to rent increases to pay for the repairs, but everyone's refusing. I think he's finally realizing he can't just ignore basic maintenance and safety requirements forever. 3 months after I moved out, I received a call from the prosecutor's office. Robert had been formally charged with felony breaking and entering, along with several misdemeanor counts. His attorney was trying to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor was pushing for jail time due to the pattern of harassment. Miss Johnson, your case has helped us identify a landlord who's been violating tenants' rights for years. We've had 3 other former tenants come forward with similar experiences after your case became public record. The civil lawsuit Michael filed on my behalf was also moving forward. We were seeking recovery of my security deposit, damages for the harassment and illegal eviction, and punitive damages for the pattern of criminal behavior. Robert's insurance company had already reached out about settling out of court. 6 months later, I received a check for $8,500 as part of the settlement agreement. This included my security deposit, compensation for the emotional distress and harassment, and coverage of all my legal fees. Robert also agreed to a formal apology letter and a commitment to undergo training on landlord-tenant law. The criminal case concluded with Robert pleading guilty to reduced charges in exchange for probation, community service, and restitution for the damage to my door. He also had to pay all the accumulated city fines, which by that point totaled over $35,000. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome was learning that Robert had been forced to sell the Maple Street property. The cost of bringing the building up to code, combined with the legal fees, fines, and settlement payments, had bankrupted his small real estate investment business. The new owner, a professional property management company, immediately invested in proper repairs and brought both units up to modern safety standards. Janet sent me photos of the renovated building 6 months later. It looked like a completely different place, with a new front porch, updated windows, and professional landscaping. The new management company is amazing, she wrote. They actually respond to maintenance requests and treat tenants like human beings. It's incredible what competent property management looks like. Looking back on those 3 difficult years, I learned several important lessons. First, documenting everything is crucial when dealing with problematic landlords. Every photo, every email, every interaction I recorded became evidence that supported my case. Second, knowing your rights and being willing to enforce them is essential. For too long, I let Robert get away with illegal behavior because I was afraid of confrontation and didn't understand the resources available to me. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, but simply ensuring that justice is served. I didn't set out to destroy Robert's business or send him to jail. I just wanted to live peacefully in a safe, habitable apartment without harassment. But when someone consistently chooses to break the law and harm others for their own benefit, eventually the consequences catch up with them. The new apartment I moved into turned out to be everything my old place should have been: safe, well-maintained, and managed by professionals who respect their tenants' rights. I've been there for over a year now, and my biggest housing-related stress is deciding whether to renew my lease or look for something even better. Sometimes people ask me if I feel bad about what happened to Robert. The honest answer is no. He had 3 years to treat me fairly and maintain his property legally. Instead, he chose to harass me, steal from me, endanger my safety, and ultimately commit criminal acts against me. The consequences he faced were entirely of his own making. If there's any satisfaction in this whole ordeal, it's knowing that future tenants won't have to endure what I went through. Robert can no longer terrorize renters because he's no longer in the landlord business. The building I lived in is now safe and properly maintained. And hopefully, my experience serves as a reminder to other problematic landlords that their tenants have rights and resources to defend themselves. Don't be a jerk to good people, indeed. Sometimes karma needs a little help from building inspectors and the legal system, but eventually, it finds its way.